You're righty there, fellow mini painters and lovers of all things Oldhamer related, and welcome to another video from Nostalgiahammer Hobbies. In this video, I'm going to be starting off a new series and working on some Orks for 2nd edition 40k. Hope you enjoy. The first unit we're going to be tackling for this Ork force is going to be some Snakebite Boars, and I'm breaking this down into two separate videos. The first one is going to be focusing on painting the Ork boars themselves, including the cyborg. It's going to be some nice simple little painting process using some contrast paint and a bit of a zenithal prime going on. The next video is going to have the actual painting of the boar boys themselves. And for that, there's going to be a little bit of something extra added in, which I'm hoping you're going to enjoy. So with that, let's have a look at some of the rules for the boars themselves, go to the painting desk, and let's do them. For as long as any orc can remember, the war boar has been a favoured mount of the warrior orc. It is a fierce and stubborn beast with sharp tusks, a thick skull, and the odour of a dung heap. Although some orcs, notably the evil sons, shun war boars in favour of bikes, buggies, and other mechanical contraptions, many orcs prefer the good old war boar with its familiar smell and unpredictable, violent nature. The Snakebites have a long tradition of boar riding and make by far the best boar boys, and their breeding stocks are famous for their immense size and vicious behaviour. The best boars are selected by the mechs and pain boys and turned into a strange amalgam of animal and machine known as a cyborg. Basic improvements to the boar usually involve its tusks being replaced by stainless steel ones, the fitment of a combined riding saddle and body carapace, and the back legs being replaced by wheels or a roller. However, the single most important addition is a cunning device triggered by a large red button fitted into the cyborg's saddle, which injects a controlled amount of chemicals into the creature's system to produce a temporary burst of extra speed and ferocity. On many cyborgs, the chemical injector is the only improvement that is made, which makes them almost indistinguishable from a normal war boar until they suddenly start foaming at the mouth and hurtle across the battlefield at an incredible speed. The boars Snakebites ride get a few extra rules for them that distinguish them from ordinary cavalry. Firstly of these ones is a bonus to their save and charge. Normally for a save being on cavalry you'll get a +1, but because they're on a boar which is tougher and much harder to kill, they get a +2 for their saving throw. And instead of a +1 for their charge, again because they're so much more aggressive than anything else, they get a +2 to their combat bonus. Now, one drawback they have is to their leadership. War boars and cyborgs are a lot more harder to control than ordinary horses, so that means that they gain an extra -1 to their leadership penalty, and that happens at any time any test against their leadership is incurred. Now, the big red button on the cyborgs is particularly interesting. You can actually use it at any point in a turn, even your opponent's turn. What happens when you do it is it gives you an extra d6 plus 4 inches to your movement and an extra d4 attacks for that turn. But it does state that the added bonus to the movement is not doubled if the boar boy is charging or running. So I'm assuming that just means that if you were charging, you'd double their standard movement and then you'd add the bonus on top of that. And here we have the boars that I'm going to be painting for this video. A few of them have got some damage on them, like missing tusks, and I did record me repairing that, and unfortunately I deleted it before I uploaded it to the computer to edit it in. Lesson learned. However, when it comes to painting them, I am going to be using some contrast paints to do some different colour fur, so I hope that's still going to be interesting for you. So let's get to the painting desk and see how I do it. A real handy little tip when you're painting something with contrast paints that's got loads of texture on it, like fur and everything like this has, is to do a sort of a zenithal prime with using rattle cans for it. And the first stage for doing this I'm going to do is do an all over coat of a grey. I've used a slightly lighter grey, but you can use anything like Mechanica standard grey if you wanted to, which is a little bit darker than this. And then over the grey I'll take a pure white rattle can and do that over it at about a 45-degree angle and straight from the top down. And then this does a sort of shading into the recesses that has been sculpted onto it, and it helps to bring out the fur a little bit. And you'll see how this helps later on when we're using contrast paints to paint the fur. I'm going to do 3 different colours for for the fur on these boars. And the first one is going to be black. And for that, what I'm going to use is Contrast Paint's Black Legion. And all I'm going to do is paint this all over the fur. Where I'm doing it on the knobs cyborg, I'm going to try and miss all of the cybernetic bits. But it's not really essential if you get some of the paint on there. Once that's dried, I'm going to take some Mechanicus Standard Grey, but any dark grey would do, and I'm going to dry brush it over all of the fur and the legs as well. For this, I'm actually using a GW's large basing brush. And if you just go along with the fur texture like that, I actually find the slight chisel shape of this brush quite handy for getting into places to get the dry brush done. And you're just going to go over patiently and carefully and just get it all on. And then once that's done, I'm going to take some Dawnstone. But when I'm dry brushing this, I'm going to do it only from the top down, and I'm going to try and aim it more specifically for areas where there's some muscle definition. The next fur colour I'm going to do is the grey one. And for that, what I'm going to use is Contrast Paint's Basilicanum Grey. And I'm going to start simply by painting this all over the whole of the boar, including any of the flesh areas. It doesn't matter because you're just going to paint over this. Basilicanum Grey actually has a relatively light coverage for a contrast paint. So what I'm going to do is actually apply a second coat of this. This is entirely optional. You don't have to do it. And if you're happy with the grey that you got from the first coat, then feel free to stick with it. But I like to add a second coat just because it makes it a little bit stronger. And it's just a simple case of going over it and doing your second coat, keeping it under control and trying not to let any pooling happen or anything like that. And there we go. That's with the second coat of Basilicanum Grey done. It's a little bit darker. From here, it's going to go do some more dry brushing. I'm going to go and do Dawnstone again. I'm just going to do this over the whole of the model, again, quite carefully, and trying not to apply too much paint. And then after that, we're going to move on up to Administratum Grey. And we're going to do the same as in the previous one, where we're going to try and target this dry brushing on more of the sculpted muscular detail. And we're going to do it in just a downward motion. Try and pick out the face as well. The final fur colour I'm going to do is going to be a browny one. Now, this wasn't necessarily used in any of the artwork I can see in the codex, but it's quite a nice colour and it looks like it works quite well, so I'm going to show you how to do it. This one is just going to be Contrast Paint's Gore Grunter Fur. We just do one coat of it as controlled as we can and put it all over the fur. And what you will notice is this boar has got a different head on it. It's one from a Warhammer Fantasy character. But what I am going to do is paint this in a sort of a Snakebites colour scheme. And we'll get to that after I've done the cyborg. And like I said, just put this Gore Grunter fur over all of the fur. Once that's dried, it's going to be some more dry brushing. For this one though, what we're going to first off use is some Deathclaw Brown. We're going to do this in the same way that we've done the first two, and just go over all of the fur as well as any of the fleshy areas that we've done. And just go around gently and build it up. And then to finish this one off, I'm going to take some Bestigor Flesh and do the same, just try and very carefully and gently target the sculpted on muscle detail, as well as a little bit along the very top of it, try and add some to try and bring out the detail. Before we get to doing the interesting parts on these, like the cybernetic parts on the cyborg, we're going to do the parts that are common to all of these boars, namely the fleshy parts and the horns. So for things like the ears, nose and any other skin parts, we're going to go in with a first off coat of Cadian Flesh Tone. Take a couple of thin coats to get it to go over. If you're just patient whilst you do it, this isn't too difficult to do. After you've done your Cadian Flesh Tone, we're going to go straight in and apply some Reikland Flesh Shade over all of this. Once your Reikland Flesh Shade is dried, I'm going to go back in with Cadian Flesh Tone and just reapply this over all the areas that I've done, but leave the shaded areas in. And then finally, for highlighting these fleshy parts, we're going to go up to Kislev Flesh and just try and pick out some of the edges of them. And I also do this with that sort of stippling motion. It can sort of add, again, might imply a bit of texture. After the skin tones, I'm going to do the tusks, because these are fairly universal for all of them as well. For that, I'm going to start with a base coat of Ushapti bone. After the coat of Ushapti bone, I'm just going to do a quick wash of Agrax Earthshade. We're going to layer back up over this for some basic highlights. Once the Agrax Earthshade has dried, I'm going to go back in with Ushapti bone and layer it back over nearly the whole of the tusks and over most of the teeth that are in there. I'm going to leave it on obviously the crevices of the teeth, and on the tusks what I'm going to do is try and, when I layer it down at the bottom of the tusks, I'm going to try and leave sort of a toothed pattern of the Agrax Earthshade left on it. And then to finish off the tusks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some Screaming Skull and I'm going to apply it in a similar way, so sort of points that are going to go up towards the tip, but do them from about halfway down this time instead. And then the last little bit that these boars have is their hooves. And what I'm going to do for the black and grey boars is I'm going to do them sort of a browny ochre colour, and for that I'm going to use Games Workshop's XV88, and it's just a case of painting it onto the hooves. And for the brown furred boars, I'm going to use another GW paint called Corvus Black. For the XV88 hooves, I'm going to give them a wash of Agrax Earthshade. To finish off the brown hooves, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to XV88 and layer this back up, but I'm going to leave this central little seam that actually looks like it's a mould line. So I'm going to leave that with the darker patch left over from the Agrax. And I'm just going to drag my brush up from the bottom of the hoof towards the top bit in like little flicking motions like this. Now, surprisingly enough, for the hooves that I've done in Corvus Black, I am not actually going to do a highlight on these. Mostly because you're not going to notice these hooves particularly when you're playing games or anything. And when you've got a satin varnish over it, it will add a nice little bit of natural shine and a bit of depth to them anyway. And it's something that you'll notice over time when you paint, that for your army top, even if you're trying to do them quite nice, there are certain areas that you just don't need to spend a lot of time on. Now that we've painted the boar's fur, we can get to the more interesting parts of painting the cyborg's mechanical parts. And to begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the red parts of it. And for the base coat of that, what I'm going to use is Vallejo Model Colours Flat Red. And it's one of the reasons why I try to keep this as white as possible, is to try and get as bright a colour as I can out of these colours that I'm using. And you will have to do at least 2 to 3 coats to get a nice solid coverage of this paint. For the blue bits, I'm going to use GW's Caldor Sky. For the yellow eye, I'm going to use Uriel Yellow. For the green eye lens, what I'm going to use is Warpstone Glow. And the final base coat for all the cybernetic parts is going to be all the metallic areas, and that is going to be Lead Belcher. I'm going to begin with the reds for highlighting, and the first step is to reapply the flat red whilst trying to leave the Carroburg Crimson visible in the darker recesses to help bring out the detail. And when it comes to the mohawk on him in particular, you don't have to be particularly precise when it comes to doing the strands of hair. So just do it in a sort of a flicking motion towards the top, and that'll add the impression of the hair strands. And then to finish off the red, I'm going to take Vallejo Game Colours Orange Fire, and I'm just going to pick out the edges of some of the detail as carefully as I can. And then when it comes to the mohawk, I'm just going to put some small little flicks of it on the very top edge of his hair. And for the blue, what I'll do is I will start by reapplying the Caldor Sky like that, and then trying to leave it so that it's darker down in the lower parts of it. I'm then going to jump straight up to Lothern Blue and just try and do as thin a line as I can to bring these out. After the blues, I'm going to do the yellows. And to begin with, I'm going to apply Uriel Yellow over everything except leaving the darker recesses again. And then I'm going to take a little bit of Flash Skits Yellow and as carefully as I can put it around the very edges of his optics. The green eye lens is nice and simple. I'm just going to use one colour, and that is going to be moot green. And all I'm going to do is pick out the very edges of his actual green lens. And I'm going to put a little dot of it as well in the corner top, so it looks like it's reflecting around a bit. And finally, just to finish off the metallics, I'm going to go up to Iron Breaker and just pick out some shinier parts of it. Try and pick out the teeth and the tusks a bit better as well as any piping that you see. And here they are, all finished up with the bases done. They look pretty decent and nicely ready for the tabletop. And as you can see up the front there are a couple that look like they're from the Warhammer Fantasy. In fact, the one on the right with the full face armour, I do remember from an orc character back in Warhammer Fantasy. I'm not sure about the one on the left, but if anybody knows which one that's from, drop us a little comment down below and let me know where that's come from. As you can see, where even though they are fantasy battle ones, with the addition of the same colours that I've used on the cyborg, the two of them fit really nicely for the Snakebites. I hope you agree with that. Anyway, now this one's finished, the next video that's going to be painting their riders. So I really do hope you're looking forward to that one. And if you look in the description down below, you'll see a link to my website where you can go to have a look at some galleries and price lists if you fancy getting any commissions done. And on that note, I'd like to say stay smiling and keep the Oldhamer alive.